Okay, so without further ado, I will hand over to our lead negotiator for our climate team of the AOSIS Chair, Ms. Anne Rasmussen.
Good morning, colleagues, and thank you so much to our moderator, Ms. Bianca, for the excellent start of the session and also for giving us the housekeeping rules in keeping with the rules while we are on the webinar. And I thank you again to our esteemed panelists and colleagues, especially we are honored today to have Honorable Minister Joseph of Antigua and Barbuda joining us later on in this panel discussion. And I wish to thank you for all of you who are joining us from around the different time zones, especially also at this time where those of us who are celebrating Eid, I wish you all a blessed Eid celebration. So, Excellencies and colleagues, Honorable Minister who will join us soon. Good morning and welcome to this very critical exchange. We are meeting today in a very difficult geopolitical context that grows increasingly unsettled as we continue. And of course, amidst the conflict that we are facing, also the energy crisis and economic shocks that continue to overwhelm a lot of countries, but particularly also small islands. And of course, 1.5, which is supposed to be our North Star, is beginning to slip from our reach. So this webinar is very important because we cannot simply afford to be distracted by the chaos and the negativity that's swirling around us, as we must maximize every opportunity to make sure that we continue to keep to our goals for keeping to 1.5. And therefore, Bonn is not merely a technical stop on the road to Turkey, as well as the COP31, but it is a critical milestone to operationalize the pathways that will ensure 1.5 remains a reality and not just a memory for some of us. Excellencies, colleagues, at COP30, under the leadership of the Brazilian presidency, we secured the Mutirão package, and this included two potential transformative tools that sit at the heart of our discussion today, which you will hear from our very beautiful panelists and presenters. And so the Global Implementation Accelerator and the Belem Mission 1.5. And as AOSIS, our message is simple. We do have the tools, we have the vehicles, we have the frameworks, but what we need now is the political will to move from incrementalism to real world delivery. These initiatives must help us shape and reflect on the realities of those who are bearing most of the impacts and ensuring that finance, adaptation, loss and damage responses are not just line items in text or just deliberate over paragraphs, but reflects real action on the ground. So today's webinar is designed to unpack these tools, to unpack these important tools that we have in the toolbox so that our negotiators and stakeholders can leverage them effectively in Bonn. But also, as the world watches, it is important to make sure that what we agree to and decisions we take at the COPs can be transformed and trickle down to the national level. So first, we will hear a key statement from our AOSIS Chair, Ambassador Ilana Seed, on why the upcoming negotiations are a litmus test for SID's priorities. Then we will dive into the technicalities of the tools that we have. I would also am very fortunate and happy to introduce to you all our new deputy lead negotiator, Rana Haynes. She's not a stranger to all of you. She's had a lot of work with us and has been an key advisor to AOSIS Chair and to the AOSIS family over the many years. She will explain how the Global Implementation Accelerator connects to the global stocktake with the aim to close those persistent implementation gaps. And next would be our mitigation coordinator, Charlene Hoff. I would also like to introduce her as our new mitigation. She's coming in as the coordinator for AOSIS mitigation stream, and she will introduce the Belem Mission 1.5. This provides practical ways for us to engage with this initiative. And please bear in mind that these initiatives are not part of the formal negotiations and will be continued to fine-tuned by the presidencies when we get to Bonn. So the angle that our presenters will come at in terms of introducing these and what it means to SIDS will be a dialogue that continues up until towards Bonn as well and beyond. So, and we will conclude with the high-level panel featuring ourselves, the beautiful ladies who will do a presentation, myself, and also deeply honored to have the Honorable Michael Joseph, Minister of Health, Wellness, Environment, and Civil Service Affairs of Antigua and Barbuda, joining us as our featured high-level guest for this session. And then after that, we will have our panel moderated by our very own beautiful communications advisor, Bianca. So to kick off our webinar this morning, evening, afternoon, Ambassador Seed it regrets that she is on travel duty and makes her unable to join us live today, but she has recorded her statement and we will now listen to it and share for you now for the opening of our webinar. Thank you very much for your attention.
Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, colleagues, friends. Climate change is often debated in rooms, but its true face is found in the communities left behind. It's found in the 22 lives lost to Cyclone Mila last month and the rare triplet cyclone that recently swept through the Pacific near Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and Fiji. It's found in Micronesia, where families are still struggling to find food and shelter weeks after a devastating super typhoon. Meanwhile, across the Caribbean, governments are bracing for significantly drier conditions, threatening crops and already precious water supplies. For our small island developing states, we're grappling with record-breaking temperatures, historic storms of unprecedented intensity, dangerous sea level rise, irreversible ecosystem loss, and economies debilitated by the cost of responding to worsening loss and damage. As tragic as we've allowed the situation to become, it can and will get worse if we stay on this dangerously flippant course. And it will no longer be just the most vulnerable, but the entire world. Potentially 14.5 million lives lost and 12.5 trillion in economic losses worldwide by 2050 will be due to climate change, according to the World Economic Forum. What makes the situation all the more grievous is that in the decades since SIDS have led the call of 1.5 to stay alive, technology has advanced in extraordinary ways, paving a clear path to net zero emissions and a safer, resilient world. Yet countries have dawdled with their commitments, and our world is now on track to likely 2.6 degrees or 2.8 degrees by the year 2100 if we don't make urgent interventions. This is why we continue to show up in spaces like Bonn, because this is the unfortunate reality of the new normal across our communities and our regions. As we advance to the 64th subsidiary body meetings at the Bonn Climate Change Conference, AOSIS is emphasizing that if dialogue isn't transformed into delivery, we're squandering the narrowing chance to protect the future of our planet and all humankind. The widening gap between NDC commitments and real-world action on issues such as climate finance, capacity building, and technology can be directly addressed by the Global Implementation Accelerator. At Bonn, AOSIS is determined to ensure that these special circumstances of SIDS and the implementation barriers specific to us are clearly recognized. And push for 1.5 aligned adaptation action. Integral to this is the operationalization of the global stocktake outcomes. Fundamentally, the Global Implementation Accelerator and the Belem mission to 1.5 must be tools that anchor 1.5 achievement in countries' duties to fulfill their Paris Agreement commitments. We know that progress is being made, but it's far below the scale needed when survival and security are increasingly at stake. I urge everyone listening to contribute to a vital turning point in our world's history. We must commit to the delivery of implementation at the speed which the best available science clearly demands. This is how we can keep 1.5 degrees alive, not just for SIDS, but for the best possible future for our world. I thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much to our chair for those very powerful remarks, and also for setting the scene for us heading into our webinar. So let us now dive into our knowledge building session. As I introduced earlier, Ms. Rana Haynes, Rue, known to a lot of us, will illuminate how the upcoming implementation COP can be bolstered by effective shaping and engagement with the Global Implementation Accelerator. We welcome Rue on board as our Deputy Lead Negotiator for the AOSIS Chair and also for the AOSIS members. Rue is an international climate law and governance specialist with over 15 years of experience in the UN climate process. A former Trinidad and Tobago diplomat, Rue has negotiated for the Caribbean community as well as the Alliance of Small Island States, and including the development of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. Rue has been an asset to not only the AOSIS Chair, but to all of us who work closely with Rue, who provides that strategic, technical, and diplomatic advice to island states in climate change negotiations and training for officials that are new to the UN climate process. So I now hand over to Rue to take us through on the understanding of the GIA, the Global Implementer Accelerator. The floor is yours, Rue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anne. And hello, everybody. Eid Mubarak to those celebrating. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. I wonder if Bianca could be right. Great. So just waiting for my presentation to load. I'm going to look a little bit at both the Global Implementation Accelerator and the Belem Mission 1.5 as two key arrangements that came out of COP30, in particular the Muchirao decision that are intended to deal with issues around implementation and ambition. Of course, these arrangements are still to some degree under development, but we'll have a look at what we know so far. And yeah, I'd love to get questions or ideas from those of us here on how we might want to engage with these arrangements going forward. So next slide, please. Are we? Okay, great. So if we could go back. So you've had a good preview. It's a short presentation. Okay, great. So just a bit of an overview of these arrangements. We know that they came out of the COP30 Muchirao decision in response to AOSIS's call for an institutional answer to the 2025 NDC synthesis report. So as a group, as we may recall, AOSIS put forward a proposal for an agenda item to consider the outcome, to consider the NDC synthesis report, and to also craft a response to support implementation and ambition, and help parties to bridge the gap, help us to bridge the gap collectively to the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. As we know, to date, we still do not have all of the NDCs submitted that were due last year. There are still about 60 outstanding. So this is an ongoing bit of work that we have to see how this is also reflected in our work this year. Both sets of arrangements are supposed to be presidency-led collaborative efforts. including Azerbaijan as COP29 president, Brazil as COP30 president, Turkey as COP31 president, with Australia as president of the negotiations. They will all work together in the context of Belem Mission 1.5. And then for the GIA, it will be Brazil, Turkey, and Australia. And both sets of arrangements are supposed to result in reports to be delivered in November 2026. So in time, I think just ahead of COP31. So taking a closer look at the Global Implementation Accelerator specifically, in the decision text, the mandate is that the GIA should be voluntary, cooperative, aim to strengthen NDC and NAP implementation and take into account previous COP outcomes. And there was a laundry list of various COP outcomes that were included in the decision text, and there's a reference back to that particular paragraph. So the intention was for the work of the GIA to be as inclusive as possible, but there was not much direction given on how these arrangements would be shaped and how they would be conducted throughout the year. That was left to the discretion of the presidencies. So the presidencies have, I think, since about last week, put forward a proposal that they are still developing on the approach. First of all, they are proposing the GIA to accelerate technology, procedures, and methodologies. So they have interpreted the mandates around the GIA to be focused more on methodologies and procedures enabling environments, I would say, as well as specific technologies and technological approaches in the context of its role in accelerating implementation. And they are proposing that it does this through the establishment of perhaps a permanent body that would sit in relation to the action agenda. So it would be some specific architecture that would sit sort of above the action agenda is what I got from what they have said. Now, they've also caveated this to say that this proposal is still under discussion, but they have floated it to get some initial responses. So that's at the highest level, what the GIA will be doing. How will it do this? It is intended to inform the selection. Well, it's intended to work on the selection of plans to accelerate solutions. Now, plans to accelerate solutions are found in the context of the various work streams of the action agenda. In order to be able to prioritize amongst these plans, the GIA will be assisted by, will be assisted by independent experts to be selected, as well as a board review or a reviewing board that would constitute presidencies and other key figures active in the UNFCCC process, presumably. The information from the board review and the independent experts would then feed to potential outputs of the GIA. And the examples that we have from the presidencies are an articulation of actors and a combination of solutions or tools. And so from what the presidencies have said, the intention is for the GIA to act as a sorting and prioritization arrangement that helps to put in place various coalitions of the willing and bring particular actors together that can help to unblock or unlock further action in certain key areas that are ripe for that type of intervention. They've said that they will be looking at existing plans to accelerate solutions, but they would also be open to new plans to accelerate solutions that would be grounded in the work of the action agenda. They interpret the action agenda as being a space where solutions that pertain directly to NDCs and NDC implementation and NAPs and NAP implementation will be found. We'll see how that goes. Next slide, please. So they've identified some potential topics that they will use as a filter for screening these plans and solutions, reducing greenhouse gas concentration, strengthening resilience, urgency of impact on climate change, potential exponentiality and cascading, NDCs and NAP relevance, sequencing and maturity of the solutions, developing countries' engagement, and socioeconomic benefits. This was given as an illustrative list. I imagine, in particular, from a SIDS lens, from the lens of small island developing states, there are other issues that could be added to this list that would be of high relevance to SIDS. Next slide, please. So looking a bit now at the Belem Mission 1.5, Mission 2 1.5, which I have to say is considerably more conceptual and more nebulous in terms of what the presidencies have put out there and how it's supposed to function. I would say that what they have put out there has not helped to highlight or delineate the difference between the Belem Mission 1.5 and the Global Implementation Accelerator, except to say that the Global Implementation Accelerator may come with a new specific institutional arrangements, but it is not yet clear if or whether the Belem Mission to 1.5 will also be treated in that way. So the presidencies have said that their approach to the Belem Mission 1.5 was conceived in the context of parties' resolve to go further and faster, including to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, to limit both the magnitude and duration of any temperature overshoot, and to close adaptation gaps, and that it will be focused on enabling ambition and implementation of NDCs and NAPs to reflect on accelerating implementation, international cooperation, and investment. And of course, we know the presidencies from COP29, COP30, and COP31 will lead the process. We really don't know much else. There has been a call for submissions. By the 30th of June, parties have been told that in responding to the call for submissions, they can focus on initiatives at the local, regional, or global levels. The presidencies have advised that we can expect events and other engagements to be convened with a range of stakeholders from now up until on the road to COP31. And we know that there is supposed to be a report delivered on these arrangements at COP31. Next slide, please, or just ahead of COP31. So in terms of the call for submissions, these are the questions that have been asked. There are two questions. The first is, what action areas and solutions have the highest impact potential to support the submission, ambition, and implementation of NDCs and NAPs? This could include the consideration of, just apologies, this is my calendar that I need to close. I don't know why it suddenly is making a lot of noise unnecessarily. Yeah, so this could include consideration of priority solutions and innovations across policies, technologies, practices, and investments, finance, technology, capacity building, and institutional opportunities, and the most significant barriers. The second question is on what is required to further strengthen international cooperation, to enhance ambition, and enable the effective implementation of NDCs and NAPs. So as you can see, the questions themselves, the questions are very, very broad in nature. In relation to question one, there is potentially a very high overlap with the GIA and the solutions that will be floated up there. I think the main difference is that in this context, what is being proposed here is for states to also focus on some of the barriers to implementation. And so there's some space for potential differentiation, but there's still a very, very high overlap that we're not sure how exactly is going to be addressed. So what are some of the key unanswered questions? First of all, how is progress from these arrangements to be captured or measured across the GIA and Belem mission to 1.5? Aside from the reports to be delivered, there is really no clarity on how we will assess whether these arrangements have contributed to accelerating implementation and supporting ambition, which was the intention behind the decision made to establish them. There's no way to measure, there's no way to check. This is a clear and key gap that would need to be raised with presidencies. What is the time frame being applied for, in particular, the GIA plans to accelerate solutions? The science is very clear that we have a limited amount of time up until 2030 to have global emissions in order to have a fighting chance of being able to constrain our warming trajectory and bring it back into line, or at least much closer to a 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway by mid-century. So timelines are extremely important. There is no indication in any of the arrangements around the GIA and the Belem mission 1.5 as to whether or the extent to which timeframes are going to be considered in the solutions or the plans and approaches, the methodologies that will be prioritized for engagement and discussion. So I think that is also a key question that needs to be raised. And finally, what kind of action could be usefully triggered by the GIA and Belem mission to 1.5 reports? Opportunities for follow-up will be key for any chance of having a real impact. As it is, we will have the reports. The reports are not linked into the wider process in any way. And it is not clear, even once the reports have been delivered, whether there will be an opportunity for parties to have a discussion on if, where, and whether they can be carried forward. And this is going to be quite important, especially as we consider the tendency now that we see in the process to want to have tangible outcomes, to be able to focus on implementation, to be able to effect real change. I think the last thing we want to do is to set up a process that is nothing more than a talking shop that doesn't deliver and doesn't go anywhere. This is not good for parties. This is not good for the climate. This is not good for the process itself as an effective space for multilateral discussion and agreement. So this is an issue that will have to be considered. Of course, there were parties who raised and flagged some concerns with having any follow-up to these reports. And so this is why we have the situation that we have with the reports being delivered, but with no clear linkage to any program of work anywhere across the process. But as we have seen, the climate crisis is accelerating. As we have seen, climate impacts are accelerating. We are in the midst of what is being referred to as the greatest energy crisis that we've ever experienced at a global level. We know that the impacts of this crisis and its root causes in the illegal war that is happening we will be feeling it more and more as time goes by. We know that there are impacts that we have yet to feel. So the situation is only going to get worse by the time we get to COP31. So this begs the question of whether we can really afford to create arrangements and discussions that lead nowhere. So maybe I will stop there and hand back over to Bianca on that note.
Thank you so much, Ru, for those excellent points. And I actually would like to throw back to Anne to throw some light on what you have said and introduce us to our next speaker, Charlene.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Rue, and also thanks, Bianca. Rue's presentation has clearly showed to us that these processes, whether they are outside of the formal negotiation, formal process, is not meant to, or we are hoping it's not meant to be just another bureaucratic layer rather than just a talk shop, but it's perhaps a wake-up call for us to have the to wake up, especially when we are now talking about countries wanting more of implementation focus, more of tangible outcomes, more of real change, and no more talking, just having a talk fest. So I think this is very important for us because for SIDS, this means moving beyond the what of the global stocktake to the how, especially how we unlock the technology and capacity that has been stored for years. So I think with this conversation, we'll continue to bond and so forth, especially with all the current, past, and future presidencies invested in this process. And it is up to us as well as parties to try and guide where we head towards with these initiatives. So thank you very much, Rue, for taking us through that. I know a lot of people are gearing up for more questions. But we have another panelist, other presenter coming on board. We welcome our AOSIS Mitigation Coordinator, Ms. Charlene Hoff. Charlene is a Foreign Service Officer in the Pacific and Regional Affairs Division at the Cook Islands Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Immigration, supporting the country's engagement in regional and multilateral affairs with a focus on climate negotiations. Her work as Mitigation Coordinator for AOSIS focuses on strengthening representation, amplifying the voices of SIDS, and advancing practical and collective outcomes at the international climate negotiations. She brings experience in public policy and regional development, as well as supporting policy collaboration across national and regional levels. So we welcome Charlene and your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, Anne, and kia ora, everyone. And thank you again for that very warm welcome. For those who I've not yet met, again, my name is Charlene Hoff, and I serve as the AOSIS Mitigation Coordinator, as well as an official from Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Immigration of the Cook Islands. I'm again joining you today from the Cook Islands, where it is currently raining quite heavily, so please bear with me if my connection becomes a little unstable. But today I'll share a few reflections on why the Belem mission to 1.5 matters for AOSIS, particularly as we confront the widening gap between climate ambition and implementation. If you can kindly bring up my presentation, please. Oh yeah, slide 2. Thank you. So I wanted to begin by grounding us in the urgency of where we currently stand. For SIDS, 1.5 degrees is not simply a political target. It is directly tied to our resilience, our economies, our infrastructure, our food system, and long-term security. The science is telling us very clearly that warming is accelerating and the impacts are being felt across our islands and communities. This is why urgency in mitigation action during this decade remains absolutely critical. Next slide, please. This slide highlights the accelerating rate of global warming. While warming has been occurring steadily since the 1970s, around 0.2 degrees per decade, recent observations show that the rate is now increasing even faster. The data shows that human-induced warming has accelerated due to increasing greenhouse gas emissions and reductions to aerosols that previously had a cooling effect. Importantly, the science also tells us that the rate of warming will continue increasing unless emissions are reduced quickly and substantially. For vulnerable countries, this reinforces why delaying implementation is no longer an option. Next slide, please. We are not on track. This slide highlights a very concerning reality for us all. Current policies and targets remain insufficient to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Despite progress made under the Paris Agreement, we are still not moving at the scale or speed required. For AOSIS, this is why there remains a strong emphasis on increasing mitigation ambition, particularly from major emitters, while also accelerating implementation of existing commitments. Next slide, please. The scientific projections continue to show that the world is currently heading well above the 1.5 degree limit. And importantly, for SIDS, overshoot is not a temporary or abstract issue. Every fraction of a degree matters for our islands, our ecosystems, and our people. This is why limiting both the magnitude and duration of any overshoot remains critically important. Next slide, please. So this slide highlights how close we are breaching to the 1.5 degree limit. Recent analysis indicates that if current warming trends continue, the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degree limit could be breached around 2030. So that's in 4 years' time. This is a reminder that the window for action is rapidly narrowing. At the same time, it also reinforces why initiatives such as the Belem mission to 1.5 are important, because they focus on turning ambition into implementation through cooperation. Next slide, please. I think this slide was already highlighted by Rue, so I might just skip this one. But again, it was just basically saying around the process is being guided by Turkey, Brazil, Australia, and Azerbaijan presidencies. I would think we can skip this slide too. This was already mentioned. In terms of for AOSIS, the Belem interest to 1.5 represents a key opportunity to secure scaled-up mitigation ambition and accelerated implementation. One key priority is continued advocacy for implementation on the GST1 outcomes, particularly the energy package, including tripling renewable energy, doubling energy efficiency, and reducing methane emissions. Full implementation of these measures could avoid up to 0.9 degrees of warming. While progress has again been made since the Paris Agreement, emissions reductions still remain far from the scale and speed required to keep 1.5 alive. So in this context, AOSIS continues to prioritize keeping 1.5 alive or within reach, scaling up mitigation ambition, improving access to climate finance, and demonstrating leadership through practical implementation on the ground. Next slide, please. This slide highlights some of the key mitigation priorities heading into SB64 and COP31. And again, first and foremost, 1.5 degrees remains non-negotiable for us. There continues to be significant urgency around mitigation action during this critical decade if we are to keep 1.5 degree target within reach. Another important priority is continuing to push for all outstanding NDCs to be submitted, particularly by major emitters, while also encouraging parties to scale up ambition so commitments remain aligned with the Paris Agreement temperature goal. There is also strong focus on accountability and implementation. This includes advocating for major emitters to deliver on their NDC commitments while also supporting implementation of the GST1 outcomes, again, particularly the energy package commitments, and engagement with initiatives such as the Global Implementation Accelerator and the 1.5 will also be important opportunities to help scale up both ambition and implementation moving towards COP31. Finally, there remains a strong emphasis on ensuring future mitigation discussions under the UNFCCC continue focusing practical solutions, implementation, and decision-making. Next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to conclude by reaffirming a very simple, important message, and you might have heard it throughout my presentation, is, again, 1.5 degrees remains the right limit. Current levels of warming are already producing devastating impacts globally, particularly for vulnerable countries and communities. Maintaining the 1.5 degree limit, achieving net zero emissions, limiting the scale and duration of overshoot remain essential to minimizing loss and damage. And for SIDS, giving up on 1.5 degrees would represent a backsliding of ambition and ultimately a betrayal of the most vulnerable. So this is why urgency, accountability, and implementation remains so important as we move towards SB64 and COP31. All right, I think that's me. Thank you. And I hand it back over to our Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much, Shah, for that very informative presentation and providing strategic insights, which is vital to this discussion today, especially when we are having conversations around these two initiatives and how it will be able to shape some of the conversations heading into Bonn, as well as still continuing these findings or these information that the presidencies are asking of parties. So that will inform the report, and as that will come out in November, I think, on the 30th. So as everybody know, these are ongoing conversations as well, and AOSIS really much is part of the conversation to shape the what the outcome as well. So this is very important, and also you've highlighted that the Belem mission can be a key vehicle to ensuring the 1.5 goal doesn't become just a relic of the past. And we must use the mission to keep pressure on the major emitters to align their NDCs, especially also with our survival limits and avoiding tipping points that may go beyond what small islands can live with and our survival. So, Excellencies, colleagues, our dear friends, we now move to our panel discussion, and this will be moderated by our very own Bianca, a communications advisor. Bianca, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. Okay, so guests, now is the exciting part of the session. We get to put our esteemed panelists on the hot seats. We are really very honored to have the Honorable Michael Joseph, Minister of Health, Wellness, the Environment, and Civil Service Affairs of Antigua and Barbuda with us. Thank you very much for making the time. Minister, I know you just had to run from cabinet, so we really appreciate it. I'll just give a little background on your expertise. I think that you have just come into your position. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I know that you bring a strong background in humanitarian leadership. Minister Joseph has served as president of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies from 2015 to 2020. He is an elected member of its governing board from 2017 to 2020. Minister Joseph is a recipient of multiple national and international awards, including the Queen Elizabeth Point of Light Award for Volunteerism. He is also an alumnus of the International Visitor Leadership Program and co-author of the global publication, We Have a Dream. In his ministerial capacity, he is committed to strengthening health systems, advancing public health outcomes, promoting environmental sustainability, and enhancing the effectiveness of the public service in Antigua and Barbuda. Minister, welcome again.
Thank you so very much for having me.
I have a multi-pronged question for you. So, with increasing international focus on more ambitious NDCs in line with the 1.5 goal, how is Antigua and Barbuda approaching its own transition towards a green economy? And what do SIDS need from the international community to make those ambitions achievable? I'd also like to know if you could expand on what kind of support or partnerships do you think are most critical for small island states so that we can turn ambition into implementation?
Yeah. So for sure, of course, as small island states, many of us, as we're aware, those that contribute the less to global emissions, And for some of us, even within the small island states, our vulnerability still varies, with some being extremely vulnerable than others. We contribute the least, but our exposure is one of the highest, and this continues to be a challenge for us, the small island states, and that's why our voices continue to echo that more needs to be done. We continue to call on larger countries to be more ambitious in their contribution to reducing greenhouse gases emission, reducing their dependency on fossil fuels, because it's not that we are advocating for countries to raise the ambitions just for raising its sake, but because it's a matter of survival for us. We know greater than anyone else. We see the coastal erosions every day, where our shorelines continue to recede inwards more and more. We are plagued with the typhoons and hurricanes on an annual basis, where it's not a matter of when, but it's a matter of who is going to be impacted on every hurricane cycle. And with our very volatile economies, that while we continue to grow our economies, we're still faced with the risk of a simple hurricane or a simple impact from some of these climate shocks. It throws back our economies for decades. And so we're always caught in the cycle of having to rebuild and having to reinvent ourselves. And at the same time, it's a double prong, it's a double-edged sword, because while we continue to be classed as, for example, Antigua and Barbuda, as high income, our vulnerability is such that we don't have access to ODA funding, and so we still have to try and develop our own countries with our local economy. But then when we have the impact, the economy shrinks, and you don't have access to help with the rebounding. So that's what I want to highlight first. However, for Antigua and Barbuda, we've worked audaciously, of course, with our Prime Minister being a very vocal person on the need for transition. We've worked to try and increase our renewable levels and to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels. We see what's happening now with increasing of fuel prices, and this has had significant shocks on our people, whereby it has caused the cost of electricity, which we're heavily dependent on fossil fuel. And so we're trying to, within our own financial means, move towards renewable energy, which is going to cost us less, but at the same time trying to balance the realities of what our financial budgets and our financial limitations are. And so this is what we have to, of course, deal with the challenges of. And so we continue to work and working with partners, reduce our debt, identify loans that are low and fit into our economic bracket, but with the reality that what we need is for countries to be more ambitious, to work towards reducing their greenhouse gases, to work towards reducing their fossil fuels, and ultimately to give us the ability to survive a bit longer with the trajectory that we're seeing. And I heard it was highlighted earlier, we've shot past the 1.5. And the first people that are always going to feel it are going to be those of the small island states. And we deserve the right to have the same level of support. We deserve the right to ensure that we have the same level of sustainability as everyone else.
Thank you so much, Minister. And indeed, we find ourselves in this vicious debt cycle, even though we are the ones who do not contribute in an impactful way to emissions. We bear the biggest burden. So absolutely, yes, bigger support from the international community is imperative if we are to achieve sustainability and if countries are to really in good faith continue in these negotiations. And I would also like to see if you can have time for one more question. Antigua and Barbuda. I know that the country has first-hand experience, again, climate finance, navigating the complexities of direct access. Can you speak a little more? Because I know that Antigua and Barbuda was one of the first local entities in the Caribbean region, yeah, to secure
Yes.
accreditation, yes, to both the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund. So the bond negotiations we heard before, it's described as this litmus test for delivery. So can you just expand a bit? How do you think the international financial system can better support the most vulnerable?
Yeah. So we definitely, yeah, I think Antigua and Barbuda serves first and foremost as a test product that as small island says we can access it. So we're not arguing that we can't access it. As a matter of fact, we've just increased our accreditation to be able to access up to $250 million in grants and loans, particularly through the GCF. And so we've been working and it can be done. The challenge that we find as small island states, though, there's the aspect of accessing it is very different than actually getting the funds that you need to transition and to strengthen your developing state. And part of that reason is because we have very small agencies, very small bodies and units that we have to rely on. And sometimes the task of doing 5 and 6 jobs fall onto one individual. And this is a challenge that many of our small island developing states have. We see in larger countries where you have a dedicated department to focus on grant writing and a dedicated department to focus on implementation and monitoring and evaluation. And so it's a lot easier for larger countries. For us, it's easy for us to get on the table, but it's hard for us to actually roll these funds out because of the fact that we have these limitations. And so if we're going to be able to do more, it has to be a lot easier. We have to, some of these provisions have to work for us as small island states. That the provisions have to take into consideration that what may take a department 30 days to do may take us 6 months. That's the realities that we exist in. And so part of it has to be with a capacity building, where I know some agencies have started doing that. I've attended a few meetings where some of them have given seed funding so you can employ individuals to help you to access these grants, access the actual implementation of those funds coming to you. And so if we have more of this taking place from some of these agencies, building local capacity through long-term investment and not just a consultant coming in for 2, 3 months, but strengthening your local capacity. So you learn from this grant writing or this loan that you're accessing, but you're able to translate that over the next 5, 10 years as you develop. Because development in the climate sphere, it's ongoing, it's constant, and it's always evolving. The area that we operate in is not one that's constant. And so what applies today isn't going to apply in the next 3 years. And what we need is for agencies to understand our unique challenges. Again, sometimes we look at the SIDS and we class SIDS as a grouping and not understand we have our own complexities within SIDS as well. We have our own challenges. And so it can't be a one size fit all for SID state because we have to be able to say within SID state, these are the provisions, they're small island states and they're large, small island states that have more resources. And how do we make it greater so that they can access it more? Because we all need to build our resilience. And the only way we can do this is through support, through funding mechanism, because as I highlighted in my previous questions, our financial budgets are constrained as they are already. And with each impact, we're battling droughts, we're battling earthquakes, we're battling rampant fires, hurricanes, and it continues. And now we see with the emergence of some of these health disasters, the implications for them on our own local economies as well.
Yeah, that's brilliantly said, Minister. Thank you so much. And you really, really hit the nail on the head. We talk all the time about the unique circumstances of SIDS. We talk about the constraints that we face. And something that people won't maybe globally think about is even that the resources to even apply for these grants, the know-how, the capacity, these are really integral considerations that need to be thought about when we're thinking about revamping the financial architecture. So thank you so much for your feedback. Please stay on the call. I am sure that
I
we'll
will.
have some questions for you. Awesome. Now it's time for our darling lead negotiator, Ms. Anne Rasmussen, to take the hot seat. And are you ready? Okay, Anne.
Thanks, Erica.
So What opportunities should these initiatives, we're speaking about the Global Implementation Accelerator and the Belem Missions 1.5, what opportunities should these initiatives advance for us, for small island developing states and vulnerable communities within the next 5 years?
Thank you very much, Bianca, and also wish the thank Minister Joseph for your valuable insights and for being part of the webinar and being in the hot seat. I think, Bianca, these initiatives, of course, as everyone's highlighted, sits outside of the rigid formal text battle. So our focus, perhaps over the next 5 years, must be using them to secure targeted international support and keeping 1.5 alive and in practical ways as well. So this means demonstrating realistic ways to wire these initiatives directly into our domestic infrastructure pipelines, technology independence, and closing the structural implementation gap as highlighted across many forums. So as Minister Joseph knows and has already alluded to from the Caribbean context, getting direct access to multilateral funds is a multi-year bureaucratic battle, and we know these new initiatives should serve as a fast-track alignment mechanism so that when a project is verified through the accelerator or when a project is matured enough to be implemented, it could be automatically fast-tracked for funding and execution on the ground so that countries don't wait 5-10 years. Priorities do change. So I think, and this is what we're facing a lot with the multilateral funds, is that we have our priorities, but it takes 2 to 3 years to access the funds. And by the time that fund already reaches the ground, 2 cyclones had already come and gone, and we are set back 10 years, and then we have to come back forward to try and get back to the development phase we were at. And again, another extreme event hits us. So this is the reality that we face as small islands. So within the next 5 years, the Global Implementation Accelerator should become a mechanism for SIDS, where SIDS can explicitly lay out our implementation gaps, and that would be able to match the technology, finance, and capacity building required to close these gaps. So, and I think similarly with the Mission 1.5, it could be a critical space over the next 5 years to confront the reality of the overshoot and leverage this initiative to keep the pressure on major emitters to align the upcoming NDCs with actual survival limits of SIDS, and gives that platform to show exactly what overshoot looks like for communities living the realities of climate change and ensuring that the global community doesn't just accept a warmer world as just inevitable. So thanks.
Thanks so much, Annie. And very quickly, I know that we want the audience to have time to ask questions, but we also wanted to know from you, with the Accelerator and the Mission 1.5 advancing through dialogues and submissions, as you said, rather than the formally negotiated outcomes, there is concern that there may be considerable uncertainty around how the initiatives will actually take shape. So against this backdrop of geopolitical instability and potential backsliding from major emitters, what is one principle that you think small island developing states should refuse to compromise on in Bonn? Annie, you're muted.
Apologies. Thanks, Bianca. I think, as you said, as we move through these dialogues and submissions around, rather than fighting over texts or so forth, there is always a risk, that those who do not want advancement in a lot of the issues we've discussed use it as a PR shield. So it's another opportunity to highlight grandstand and point to their participation as a substitute for real emission cuts or financial delivery. So the attempt to do this is beyond our control, and we cannot stop those who in a position to do so and trying to backslide. So we cannot force them to write these tools into binding law. But we can do in Bonn is refuse to let these platforms become just a talk fest or become just a talk shop I think as Ru had said, but it could, our position in Bonn must be that any dialogue or submission or framework under the Accelerator or on the Mission 1.5 must be transparent, public, and clear reporting. And of course, we need to be, as SIDS, we need to be in that driver's seat as well, so that by November, the reports that come out that really do speak to the detriment and speak to the impacts that's happening already and continuing with small islands. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Annie. And I know that AOSIS will be working diligently and tirelessly as usual to ensure that we uphold accountability and we're able to really push the action that we need in this era of implementation. So quickly, we move on to our new Deputy Lead Negotiator, Ms. Rana Haynes. Rana, are you ready for the hot seats? There you go. All right, Rana. So your question is, how could the Global Implementation Accelerator help to close the persistent implementation gap between NDCs and actual emissions trajectories?
I think on this one, I don't have specific suggestions. I guess what I would have are a set of hopes in terms of what I think we would want to see coming out of the GIA. First of all, the hope is that in bringing together these key actors, prioritizing a short list, they say it's about 3 to 5 initiatives a year under the GIA, that it will contribute to unblocking inertia that might exist around specific actions that are going to help us in the context of NDC implementation as well as NAP implementation. Of course, the approach is untested. I think with the architecture that has been proposed, it's meant to strengthen the action agenda and the way that it functions, and I guess provide a more action-oriented to the work of the action agenda, and create expectations to see clearer outcomes. And I think there is potential for that to happen, especially if the topics that are prioritized are the right ones. And I think that will be an iterative process where countries will have to give their input and reflections, and where I hope that all of the learning that has taken place across the process in the life of the implementation of the Paris Agreement can also be brought to bear on assessing where are those key priority areas where we see high potential, but also inertia and sticking points that can potentially be moved to deliver transformative results. So I think that the hope is there that this can contribute to helping parties to implement in the first place what is on the table, which we know from an ambition point of view is insufficient. We saw Charlene's presentation. We know the emissions curve is heading in the very much wrong direction based on what's on the table. I think where we get into a greater level of challenge is on that question of actually closing the gap, because that means that we need to take a leap forward in ambition, not just around planned action for 2035, but around action that is to happen still in this 2030 period, which is the key period. And to my mind, in order for us to be satisfied that this can happen, there is still a missing element around accountability that is not yet a part of the proposed arrangements in the GIA. This can take many forms. Of course, this is also a missing element around the action agenda in the first place. So my assessment is what has been presented to us takes one crucial step forward in strengthening the action agenda, but still falls short of where we need to go in order to address the very legitimate issues around implementation and ambition that AOSIS flagged at COP30 for decision-making, for action, for further consideration.
Well said. Thank you so much, Ru. And I think what you said about unblocking inertia, that was very profound. And that is something that's imperative if we are going to get some real strong outcomes at these negotiations. I'd like to move on to Charlene. Charlene, are you ready?
Yes.
There you go. All right. So, Charlene, your question is, how can the accelerator, oh, apologies. How can the Belem mission to 1.5 potentially help to close these persistent implementation gaps between the NDCs and emission trajectories? And specifically, I'd love to know about the reporting frameworks, or as Ru was saying, we need to strengthen accountability. How can these accountability mechanisms better track actual delivery on the ground?
Well, sorry, there was a bit of a cutout. Can you just repeat
No
that
problem.
question, please?
So what I wanted to find out from you, similar to Ru, the initiative of the Belem mission to 1.5, how can you envision it potentially closing these implementation gaps? And do you think there are reporting frameworks or accountability mechanisms
Oh, yeah.
that can be implemented to really track delivery on the ground?
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I think for the key point is that we do not need that in terms of the frameworks. We don't need new accountability frameworks. These already exist under the Paris Agreement. It's including the NDCs, the Global Stock Take, and the Enhanced Transparency Framework. I think the real issue is not the lack of systems, but the gap between commitments and implementation. So for the Belem mission to 1.5, the focus should be on strengthening how these frameworks track delivery on the ground. That means clear, transparent reporting on what countries are committing to, their timelines, the finance being mobilized, and the progress actually being made. If used properly, these mechanisms can show whether countries are delivering on the commitments in practice.
Thanks so much, Charlene. And yeah, absolutely. We really need to ensure that we utilize these tools to close the gaps. And thank you very much to you and Arana for really brilliantly outlining the potential pathways. I would love to get a final word from all of our panelists as we approach the negotiations at Bonn. What, in your opinion, would be a strong outcome for SIDS? Minister Joseph, can we start with you? Or maybe we should go to Anne first. Oh no, there's Minister.
All right, sorry about that.
No worries.
I'm multitasking.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So I think that some of the things that we would love to see is that we would want to see for there to be a need for greater push for urgent action. I think we have to stop talking and have to really get actions from individuals and not just commitment. So we really want to see real commitment from individuals on implementing of this whole transition to renewable energy. We want to be able to see timelines that are put in place. We also want to see real progress on finance. We want to have a mechanism that makes it easier so that people understand the challenges that we face. As I highlighted when I spoke about access to financing, that we don't want to be able to just access it. We want to actually be able to get it and to utilize it for our benefit. And even in the area we're talking about loans as well, one of the things I was speaking to the Prime Minister and the argument is that we would love nothing more than to transition to 100% renewable in the next 3 years if we can access loans at 1 to 2% for a 20 to 25-year period. If we're able to access a loan to transition our entire electrical infrastructure, then this is something that we would definitely work towards. And then finally, for us to build greater partnership with larger countries that understand our individuality and our individual challenges, and work with our different small island states in achieving our individual goals through this relationship. So that's what we would love to see.
Thank you so much, Minister. I think that I'll actually have Anne go last. So, Rowana, would you like to share?
Mm. Sure. I think what the minister said in terms of substantive approaches really summed it up quite well. I think he also touched on some of those areas where there is inertia, where arrangements like the GIA might help to scale solutions and efforts to support transformation. So maybe in terms of what I want to see coming out of Bonn, I could be a bit more conceptual or high level. Um, I would very much like to see that parties arrive at the Bonn session prepared to acknowledge that even in the last 6 months since the last COP, the world has changed substantially, and it has not changed for the better. And that those changes have consequences for our approach to our work and for the level of urgency that we dedicate to finding solutions to this crisis and to actually implementing the Paris Agreement and all parts of it, not just selective parts of it. I think it would be really important for us to come out of Bonn with a clear message of hope that even in the context of all of the geopolitical uncertainty, even in the context of all of the doubts around whether multilateralism still works, whether a consensus-based system can still function, there needs to be a message of hope that parties, those who are still in, and that's the vast majority of the world, continue to take this issue and their commitments extremely seriously and are prepared to take the steps in order for us to achieve the goals that we've all agreed to in the context of the work that we have set out for us for COP31. Thanks.
Thank you. Excellent. And Charlene, can I pose this question to you?
Yes, of course. I think a strong outcome coming out of for SB64 as well as COP31 would be for the mitigation work program itself would be really moving beyond just knowledge sharing, I think, as mentioned before, and start focusing on how it can actually deliver real outcomes, particularly in scaling up both ambition and implementation. Ideally, that would lead to some substantive conclusions ahead of COP31. And at the same time, we should be advancing the Global Implementation Accelerator and the Belem mission to 1.5 with a clear focus on practical solutions that can help close that gap. I also think it's important that we keep the best available science at the center of our decision making and make sure the links with the UAE dialogue and the global stocktech are actually helping us address these challenges in a concrete way. And finally, I think we need to keep pushing on accountability and including making sure outstanding NDCs are delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. And Annie?
Thanks very, very much, Bianca. I think Minister Joseph and Sharon and Rue have highlighted what is important. I think as also, the global tensions continue as we go on the energy crisis are increasing challenges for many seats, including travel to Bonn. So this might impact representation because some of our small islands have taken travel bans, to attend Bonn. So we have we need to continue. So in that fragile context, we continue to be challenged with potential, direct ramification for our capacity to participate fully in Bonn. And we have a heavy and complex agenda at SB64 with several new items and dialogue starting, and managing these with small delegations present challenges for AOSIS, alongside the complementary initiatives that we have spoken about today being convened around the action agenda and other things. So and there is a lot of several decisions that are expected at COP31. So I'm hoping the discussions need to begin in earnest in Bonn, in particularly on the mitigation work program and on the just transition work program. Sorry to go down to the upper to the technical level, but I think among others, we need to make progress in these discussions from Bonn. Have some draft decisions from there, so that will enable us to have better decision making at COP31. So thanks.
Thank you so much. And thank you very much to all of our panels for that brilliant discussion. I think that you all highlighted the urgency of greater access, greater speed. These initiatives, they really will not make much of an impact unless we respond to those issues affecting the most vulnerable. And we also need greater accountability. That is imperative. And it's just my hope, going into negotiations, that parties really wake up to the dire state of the world and find ways to put our people first, with really transformative action. So thank you again, our panelists. And we do have some time for some questions. So I would like participants who have a question to kindly raise their hand, and I will call on you. We have a little under 15 minutes for questions. So don't be shy now. This is your opportunity to speak with the SIDS negotiators before our bond negotiations. Let me see. All right. Okay, to get this going, I actually have a question for Charlene. Charlene, with regards to the Belem Mission 1.5, how do you think that this initiative can reconcile global mitigation urgency on the climate agenda with SIDS developments and our energy access needs?
Let me just turn that back on. Thank you, Bianca, for that question. I think for SIDS, climate action and development must go together. They cannot be separated. So reconciling global mitigation urgency with SIDS needs means ensuring that climate action also improves energy access, affordability, and resilience. So it's not only about cutting emissions, but about delivering solutions countries can actually implement. I think the Belem Mission to 1.5 can help identify those investments, technologies, and partnerships needed to achieve both mitigation and development. I think in this way, climate action can support development rather than compete with it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Charlene. And Joseph, hi, how are you? You're up.
Hi, yeah, I hope you can hear me. Thanks for organising this. Did I understand correctly that AOSIS is adding a agenda item to Bonn, calling for a response to the NDC synthesis report? And if so, is that separate to the Mission 1.5 and the Global Implementation Accelerator, or are those two things the response? Could you just clear that up for me a bit? Thanks.
All right, I will actually put this to Rue, but we did put that forth last year at COP30. So Rue, can you expand on that?
Yeah, what I said in my presentation was that this was put forward last year, as Bianca said, for COP30. It is not, there's no proposed AOSIS agenda item for Bonn. And what I also said in my presentation is that the outcome of the discussions on the proposal for that agenda item was the Global Implementation Accelerator and Belem Mission to 1.5. So those arrangements are, in theory, meant to respond to the AOSIS ask for that agenda item on the NDC synthesis report.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood that. Can I ask if AOSIS has any submissions for this one, for the agenda?
AOSIS does not have any submissions for a new agenda item for Bonn.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much, Joseph. And we have a follow-up for Charlene. How can we ensure that reporting goes a step further to show what is being done to course correct if targets aren't being met? Monitoring must feed back to enhance action. Charlene, are you still with us?
Yes. Okay, yes, sorry. Just trying to click the buttons here. Let me just Okay, there we go. I think, again, there are mechanisms in place which we need to leverage, and how countries report on them, like the BTRs and the GST mechanisms. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Charlene. And I think you may be able to take this one from Caroline. She asked how prominent AOSIS thinks the topic of transitioning away from fossil fuels at Bonn will be, and as well as COP31. Will the focus be on renewable energy rather than fossil fuel in particular for the group? Anne, would you like to take this?
Sorry. Yes, I think. I mean, I think the UNFCCC process, we already agreed to the necessary actions at COP28 in the GSD1 outcome. The energy package, as is now known, requires us to pursue, among others, transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems. So, and we all know what the decision is. So, and I think the roadmap sits outside of the process, but offers opportunity for willing countries to advance on what is agreed and perhaps create that necessary momentum in the current moment and help influence as we head into the second GSD in identifying what is working and what can be advanced urgently.
Thank you, Anne. And this is an interesting question. Do you see SID's role in the negotiations changing as we are moving towards implementation and beyond text agreements compared to the pre-Paris period? Would anyone like to take this on?
Maybe I can start. I don't know if anybody else would want to weigh in on this. I would say that AOSIS has, since before the Paris Agreement, since the UNFCCC, played a particular role in the UN climate process to tell the truth, to come into the negotiations with positions that are informed by the best available science, to promote the linkage between science and policy making, to push for ambition.
Oh, I hope we haven't lost you.
Sorry?
Oh, there you go. You glitched a bit. You're back.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No.
Oh, my connection is unstable, that's why, apologies.
No worries.
So AOSIS has played a particular role in the negotiations, which to me remains highly relevant. I think even more relevant now than it ever was before, as there are challenges now to the integrity of the science. There are challenges now to the relationship between the best available science and the policy process. There are challenges around whether we need to commit to taking the highest ambition possible, to proceeding with the highest ambition possible in response to the climate crisis. And so the traditional role that AOSIS has played in negotiations remains relevant and will continue. In terms of a supposed shift to implementation, I think there's a lot that needs to be clarified here. First of all, implementing the Paris Agreement means a number of different things. It means responding to the obligations in the Paris Agreement around preparation of a NAP, preparation of an NDC, taking domestic action aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it also means responding to the obligations in the Paris Agreement around parties demonstrating progression in their nationally determined contributions, in their successive nationally determined contributions, and in parties also strengthening their efforts over time in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So this false distinction that's made between a focus on implementation and a presumed shift away from considering what else is needed from the system in order to support ambition is exactly that, a false dichotomy. All of the work is a part of the Paris Agreement, and all of the work will continue. It is not either or, it is and.
Thank you, Rue. And we have a question for Minister Joseph. What opportunities should these initiatives, the Global Implementation Accelerator and Belem Mission to 1.5, how would you like to see these initiatives present opportunities for Antigua and Barbuda, as well as vulnerable communities within the next 5 years?
So just repeat the question for me again, sorry.
With regard to the Global Implementation Accelerator and Belem Mission 1.5, what opportunities would you like to see these initiatives advance for Antigua and Barbuda and all vulnerable countries within the next 5 years?
Yeah. So I think that for Antigua and Barbuda and other vulnerable countries, I think that what we would like to see is that we have great access to financing. Many of us are currently trying to build, greater resilient infrastructure, resilient healthcare. We're trying to invest more so we understand what it is that we have to go through and trying to reduce these. I mean, what we want to see is, sorry, yeah, sorry. So what we want to see is opportunities that help to reduce the burden on us. Um, Again, we don't want anybody to think that we're asking for handouts. And I want to take this opportunity to commend our negotiators because they know what it is that we need. But we want solutions that are country driven to help with climate resilience. We don't want uh, one size fit all solutions that are going to come and be placed on small island states and say this is what you should do. We want it to be led from our perspective, and that's why our negotiators are working so hard because I continue to say our needs differ even within small island states. And sometimes part of the problem is that we're given solutions that don't meet our local standard. And so if we have solutions that we ourselves are part of, that we develop, and this is what I hope that one will bring, is that we can then take those and translate them into real action on the ground that can help with our transition, that can help with our resilience, that can help with our sustainability and overall our long-term survival.
Thank you very much, Minister. So I think that we are coming to a close, and I would like to call on our lead negotiator to share closing reflections. But I also see this question in the chat that I would appreciate, Annie, if you could touch on very briefly. How can the public engage in these global negotiation processes? I think that it's so important to ensure that we get out of our bubble, we involve the citizenry, and really empower them with the information to advocate for these outcomes that we need at these negotiations. So as we close, I share the floor with our lead negotiator, Anne Rasmussen. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Bianca. And of course, let me take this opportunity to also thank Minister Joseph for your leadership in today's webinar in strongly representing SIDS leaders in our political will in terms of providing that guidance, as not only small islands are small, but we always punch above our weight, where we know that we are the voice of reason and that we are the most suffered regions due to the impact. So thank you, Minister Joseph, on behalf of the chair for highlighting those. And I wanted to also sorry, Bianca, the question is how all parties should be part of the discussion?
Well, actually, she wanted to figure, I think it's more of a civil society question. How can the public be more empowered and engaged to participate in the process or to contribute to the global negotiations process?
I think there's already processes in place, like in Bonn, where the negotiations are at. Civil societies are allowed as observers to be part of the discussions. And really recently, and as we go forward with transparency processes, they are allowed to come into the negotiation rooms, offer insights, sit in a lot of meetings. So that door is open. There is the action agenda, where a lot of the action agenda, and also in the green zones and different things that within the COP, where you have private sector, civil society, and parties coming together to share those insights. So, and I see it with a lot of the ministerial conversations and dialogues that we've had so far throughout this year, leading to Bonn, there is a space for all for civil societies and NGOs to sit at the table with ministers and also ask questions. So I see there's a lot of that parts where you can participate, but also, you know, it depends on the presidency, incoming presidency of every COP, and for every party to write to the presidency to ask for their plans on how they foresee a lot of players come to the table in the different processes that we have in place right now, not just in the formal negotiations process, but also lots of processes outside of the formal negotiations that do allow for all the parties to come in, private sector as well, banks, you know, and also civil society, you know, we all need to be part of that architecture that really forms the international responses to climate change. So I think that's just a short response to that. But if there are no other questions, I would just like to close our webinar on behalf of Ambassador Seed. And I'd like to thank our panelists for the very well presented take on what we see these tools can really help SIDS, but also how it'll be shaped going forward in the next coming years that would really help the most vulnerable, but also be able to be that vehicle that accelerates action on the ground. So thank you to Minister Joseph for the political insights to that. Thank you to Rue. I'm very excited to welcome Rue as our deputy lead. She's always been our negotiator for a lot of other things, you know, GSD last year helped the chair in the Mutirao. So that role has always been there, but formally she's come on board this year to really help us in terms of presenting as we continue to deal with the proliferation of of decisions that we take at COPs and add on to our mandates and add on to our work. So there'll be lots of conversations happening. So I'd also like to thank Charlene for your well-articulated presentation, your insights and guidance as well on how to move forward with these tools, but also how to bring in within the discussions at the formal negotiations as well in Bonn. So I'd like to thank you very much for today's session, but also thank you to our beautiful moderator, our communication coordinator, Bianca, for putting this together, for stressing out for all of us in terms of making sure that we have this prior to Bonn, because this will shape how we tend to engage, you know, our mind. This will give us the mindset to approach this, because the presidencies, past, current, future, will have sessions in Bonn that will speak to the GIA, to the 1.5 there. So this is a good tools at our disposal and the collective brain to keep the engine going, to keep the momentum going. And I think let's take the Mutirao spirit from the shores of Brazil to the halls of Bonn. I know it'll be very a lot of work in Bonn, but eventually we will hopefully finish in Turkey with the leadership of Australia and Turkey presidencies to bring this to a vision of how we see the world going forward in the next years. There would also be attempts, let me perhaps give some insight. There will also be attempts to water down the Mutirao package and distract us with procedural delays. But for our part, we have continually pressed and insist that the Accelerator and the mission 1.5 do not stand as empty promises, but are appropriately resourced to help SIDS, LDCs, but also everybody who's a player at the table. So, and we must ensure the indicators discussed today are embedded in the outcomes of the report coming out of Bonn, but also at the end of this year when the presidencies do present their report. So I'd like to thank you, of course. Great thanks to Honorable Minister Joseph for your time. I know you have cabinet, you have all the meetings, but we're so fortunate to have you give us your time and give us encouragement as well to us, the negotiators, for going a little bit further in Bonn, because I know there's a bit of fatigue coming out of Belem and that push that we need to come from our leaders. You've just given us an encouragement to negotiators to keep going. And so we thank you, Minister Joseph, and to all of our AOSIS team, on behalf of the AOSIS Chair, Ambassador Seed, and to all our dear negotiators, our lead coordinators, and all our friends online, and all the excellencies and colleagues for your attention and your tireless work. We thank you very much for your contribution, and we continue to have this going towards Bonn. And we thank you. This webinar is well informed and resourced. So thank you very much also, Bianca. And may I declare the webinar closed? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day and Eid Mubarak. And thank you so much to our AOSIS team for all of your supports. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.